I saw the story on national television. So we have, hopefully, right here, George Carpenter from CNS Response. George, you're there.
I'm here, Garland.
So tell me, first of all, tell me about who CNS Response is before we get, and tell our listeners about who CNS Response, about your company before we get started into this groundbreaking technology that I am very excited about.
Well, great. Well, this is actually the product of 25 years of work by a group of doctors who basically looked at the 130 drugs that they had to choose from and realized they had no test to figure out which one would work in your brain. So, that's kind of the big surprise when we explain that we're a neuroscience company that collects data and gives it back to doctors. People think, well, is this a problem? Don't doctors have a test? And the answer is no. If you have depression or bipolar or ADD or even head injury, usually doctors are guessing about which of these many medications to give you. So what they did is they collected 20 years of data on outcomes on different medications, and they referenced that to a test that's been around for, since 1929, electroencephalography, or EEG.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, cap you see the NASA astronauts wearing.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's a passive, painless test of brain function. And what they did is they realized, there's variables from EEG that correlate with medication response or resistance
mm-hmm.
for individual brains. So, Garland, your brain may be responsive to a standard SSRI antidepressant like Prozac,
mm-hmm.
and mine might be resistant to it, and the doctor doing this test would know not to give that to me, but to give me, another drug.
Wow, that has profound implications in the medical industry. What kind of things have you looked at that will change, that you may be able to change using that?
Well, it's interesting, and I was listening to Chris Nowinski talking in the segment before about head games, and the thing that seems to be the common element among suicide, homicide, school shootings, head injuries, all of those share one common thing, which is we have very few treatments that we've proven work, and we have treatment failure. So about a third of the time, the medications from this list of 130 work for a patient. Two-thirds of the time, they don't. So the biggest single thing that we contribute is a reduction in the number of trial and errors that a doctor's going to have before he finds the right medication. He can look at our report and really narrow the range.
So in a way, you've kind of mapped the chemical electrical connections that are going on in the brain. And if that's correct, what kind of factors will determine whether a drug is or is not effective based on that information?
I'd love to say that we've done the human connectome of the brain, which is work that's happening at NIH right now and other places, but we really haven't done that. We've come up with about 74 different variables that come from the EEG test.
An equation.
Again, been around forever. Exactly. It's math. We simply have algorithms that say where there's a high correlation between known outcomes over 20 years and these variables, then that we compare that brain to yours. And it's sort of like when you buy a book on Amazon.com,
mm-hmm.
and people who bought this book also like this one and this one. People who have brains like yours didn't respond to half of the drugs that are on the list, but did respond to these maybe old generic drugs that your doctor probably wouldn't even have thought of. That happens again and again.
And we're talking to George Carpenter of a company called CNS Response. And we are particularly interested in this technology because in this company because they have found a way to predict so that a doctor can eliminate certain drugs drugs that would have a negative impact from patients and kind of narrow it down to what they can actually take. And there could be some instances where a person almost can't take it. Let's say there are two types of drugs, and a person is looking at significant side effects from either type. They may have to make a decision whether they try some other therapy other than medication therapy.
A study done last year for a couple of the big insurers, United Healthcare and WellPoint, and it was a look at doctors in our network who used this report, and it looked at the same kind of primary outcomes, 2 to 3 time improvement in outcomes, but it also looked at exactly what you're talking about. There was an 87% reduction. This is in about 230 commercial patients. 87% reduction in suicidal thinking and a 55% reduction in severe adverse events. Those are medication side effects that would lead you to be at risk. And so we're doing a study that's actually launching soon at Walter Reed and Fort Belvoir in your area with about 2,000 soldiers, and it's going to look at exactly that over. It's a very large study, so over 2,000 folks, to see if getting to the right medication more quickly and more accurately reduces side effects. Because if we can do that with soldiers, I think we will all feel like we picked the right career.
Once again, for our listeners, you're listening to 89.3 FM WPFW. Garland Nixon here.
Assume your technology will allow parents and administrators to make better choices when those young people do end up using or are put on those drugs.
That last part, that's exactly what we're hoping, is that when they don't need them, they won't have them, and when they do need them, they'll get the right one. And we actually saw that in that same study where we saw for commercial healthcare patients, big reductions in risk. We also had about 10.5% of the patients after the EEG, the answer was no medication at all.
Yeah.
So we think there's a real benefit there. We're not pro or anti-drug. The only claim we make is reduce trial and error. Doctors don't want to be guessing. You can reduce trial and error. You reduce the impact of some of these drugs that can have nasty side effects. So that's really what we're doing. So for ADD, about a third of the time, it's misdiagnosed.
Yeah, exactly. That was my follow-up point.
It's funny you bring up ADD because I am a person who has ADD.
I also have ADD.
And I am a person who takes medication for ADD. I take Wellbutrin. And it's funny because people that, there are a lot of people who are, try to hide various things. And I joke about it. I say, if I don't take ADD, I'm going to be, running around, bouncing into walls, talking nonstop. Well, okay, I talk.
It's really interesting. How did you arrive at Wellbutrin? Was that the first one that you tried?
Yeah, in fact, it was. I went, when I was first, diagnosed, I knew I had ADD. When I found out what ADD was and I read the symptoms, there was no question in my mind that all I had to do was read the symptoms. And I knew. So I went online and I took this little test. Take this test, and if you score above this, and I had probably had you couldn't have gotten a higher score than I got. So at any rate, I went to the doctor, and he said, well, there are various things, and I wasn't thrilled with taking any of basically the speed.
Right.
And he said, well, we've got Wellbutrin, and that has the least side effects. And what he said was it works for about 60% of the people. For those it works for, it works well, and for some people it doesn't do anything.
Yes.
I tried it. It was a miracle drug. The first time I took one pill, and 20 minutes later, I thought to myself, so this is how the rest of the world feels. I'm not losing everything. I'm not running around in circles. The world seemed to suddenly, it wasn't me, the rest of the world suddenly slowed up.
I love that you had that experience because that's exactly kind of the point that drives our mission, which is drugs aren't good or bad. The right drug on the right person is life-changing, and the wrong drug can also be life-changing, to the negative. And I got to tell you, that was an unlikely pick that you have a very good doctor that you got Wellbutrin right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, just to share my own experience, my experience was very similar to the point where, I knew as soon as I found out what ADD was, I knew I had it, and I did get diagnosed, and then I was put on a couple of different drug treatments, both of which had a variety of other effects that I did not like. So right now, and actually for many years, my ADD has gone unmedicated because my experience with the 3 drugs or so that I had been cycled on and off really didn't give me the sort of response that I like. So, for me to have the opportunity to work with a company like CNS, to better steer me towards something that might actually be helpful for me, I mean, I think that'd be an ideal sort of situation.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who, and I've heard it before, people who say, no, I'm not going to take medication. I mean, if you turn on, if you watch TV and you see any advertisement about any drug, you'll never take it if you watch the last 30 seconds. They'll say, if these are all the things that can happen, if you see your face turn blue, suddenly, immediately stop taking the medicine. However, discontinuing the medicine too fast can kill you.
Exactly.
So that's the real scary part about medicine. It's not whether or not it's going to work. It's whether or not you're going to be around after you take it.
Exactly. And all of these drugs are approved based on studies that are basically an improvement in the average population in the treatment group versus the average population in the control. But, none of us are average. We're all different. And so, what's really happening here is we're beginning to get to a point in neuroscience where we realize what those differences in the brain mean and how they can express themselves electrically and chemically and get, hopefully we're learning enough to get to the right ones quicker for people like you guys and soldiers and football players.
So, Mr. Carpenter, I mean, it seems like what CNS has done here is kind of like a duh moment.
Exactly.
Basically what they're doing is they're taking data, they're aggregating it, and they're using that data to make decisions about future choices. And for whatever reason, that's so contrary to what we do in medicine, generally speaking. Maybe this algorithm that we spoke of earlier could be applied to a lot of other things in a way that we practice medicine, in our country, just generally speaking.
That is our hope. I think we're coming on a day. I think IBM talks about this. 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. Huge avalanche of data. And in medicine, where we have so much treatment failure and so much cost associated with it that really doesn't go to make anybody better, we have a real opportunity. Now, IBM Watson, this computer that's a natural language, artificial intelligence kind of computer, is being used today in research on chemotherapy, very much like what we do. Mm-hmm. They're doing for which chemotherapy is likely to work for your individual physiology and your tumor type, and with phenomenal results. And again, that's just math. All they've done is take a big table of outcome data and combine it with a table of physiology data. In our case, it's EEG, and there's lots of other tests, and correlate them and come up with algorithms that predict what people like you would respond to. And I think that could potentially solve a lot of our problems, certainly our budget problems, but also, healthcare.
I feel like, I'm really glad, we have you on this show, because I feel like, this is, it's funny, this isn't some kind of groundbreaking technology, but it is taking, medicine in a totally different direction.
Yeah.
A direction that says, I'm not trying to invent something new. But have you ever thought about looking at everything that we have and determining what we can, we have, from the looks of things, what you're saying, we've got a lot of information and a lot of things that we can do to change medicine within the data that we have. And if we sift through the data and do comparisons such as you're doing, what you're doing is maybe one of the new directions that medicine's taking in the world. I can really see where worldwide this can change the medical industry and change the pharmaceutical industry, because at some point,
right,
the data of the number of people and how many people and which people and what percentage of people have side effects on particular medicines may make a pharmaceutical company say, well, we now have data that 89.9% of the people can't take this medicine because of side effects. We may need to discontinue this. However, this one, 21% of the people. So let's make more of these and let's take this off the market. And the FDA at some point may want to utilize this for similar things.
Absolutely. I mean, we think one of the key missions of the FDA is improving medication safety. And we think just arithmetically, by definition, if you can reduce trials and errors, look at who our competitor is. Our competitor has error in its label. Nobody wants trial and error. If we just reduce the number of times a doctor has to guess before they get you the right medication, then that improves safety. And we think we've been working, very cooperatively with the FDA and getting this Walter Reed trial up and running, and we think this could be a really positive development.
Yeah, I don't like those two words together, doctor and guess.
Now, I really hate to be the contrarian at this point, because I definitely support what you guys are doing. But I've been reading a lot about the issue of introducing checklists into the medical community, which is basically a process by which doctors have to follow literally a checklist in many of the procedures that they do, so that they don't forget things, they don't lose instruments inside of body cavities and things along those lines. And the resistance to checklists has been astronomical from the medical community. I mean, do you guys believe that there'll be some resistance to this, to the art of diagnoses, which doctors believe they have or have been trained to use throughout time?
Yeah, I think I've run 3 companies in this area, and they've all encountered physician resistance. And ultimately, it gets to the point where the evidence is so overwhelming that physicians become afraid not to use it. So you get from fear of adopting to fear of not adopting, and we're not there yet. We have a long way to go. There's plenty of institutional resistance, as there is to any new development. I mean, 20 years ago, we used to think that the biggest psychiatric illness was stress, which caused ulcers. And then some guys in Australia said, "Know what? It's a bacteria, and you can get rid of the bacteria with antibiotics." And now we're doing 90% fewer ulcer surgeries in hospitals. It's a huge savings, just because somebody realized the paradigm, the model for what caused it was wrong. And the oldest diagnosis in psychiatry used to be syphilis until they figure out what caused that.
Yeah.
And, you can cure it with organic chemistry, and it left psychiatry. So we expect plenty of resistance, but also we think we've got some powerful allies, the military. I think, frankly, this wouldn't have become such a big issue if it weren't for the fact that the military is transparent and they're, publishing their data on suicides. The ultimate treatment failure endpoint is somebody kills themselves. If you think about the survival instinct we all have, it's one of the biggest, most powerful instincts we have. And to defeat that and to kill yourself, you really have to have given up hope. And a lot of these soldiers, we talked to, they've been on, multiple medications over years that have not worked. And we think, if it weren't for the military, this issue might not sort of reach critical mass. But as you've seen, we've got a lot of military folks supporting this and looking for a better answer. And I think also, the NFL and the people who are going after, school shootings and violence, these all trace their origins back to people who failed mental health treatments. The number one treatment is medicine.
And something else that I think is important here, that another issue. As I said, I felt that this was a very significant issue that really needed to be discussed, and more people need to hear about it and kind of know what's going on, and we need to start getting it out there. And the other part is this, from a financial perspective. You know, one of the things that's talked about in the whole discussion about, you know, how the discussion about the debt and the deficit, the discussion about the ACA and universal health care and all of those. One thing that within that discussion always comes up, and that is money, the cost of health care. What does it cost? Bringing down the cost. We've got to bring down the cost over the course of time. Or if you don't have coverage, and let's say you have to buy your own medication, whatever the case may be, or you have, as some plans, many plans have now, a person may have to pay for the first $500 or $1,000 each year in medication before the plan starts covering it. All that being said, if I take a medication for 2 months that doesn't do any good, I'm buying it, paying for it. And I take another one for another 6 months or 2 months that doesn't work. And it takes me 6-7 months to find one that works. I've spent a lot of money. Or if it's some type of a government plan, even if it's Medicare, Medicaid, whatever, the government has been paying for medicine that does not work for 6 or 8 months. As opposed to being able to, or doesn't work, or you may not be able to say that it doesn't work, but cause that the person can't use because it causes their body would reject it for whatever reason. It would cause side effects. But you eliminate all of that wasted time and all of that wasted money and all of that wasted treatment, which a person can die if it's the wrong medicine. It's something that I can see can affect cost for both the individual and for any government health programs, which ultimately it's our tax money, so we all save money.
Amen. I think the best bipartisan thing we could do is to agree to stop paying for treatments that don't work.
Right.
And, if 2/3 of what we know we're paying $144 billion for isn't working, then, if we can do something, and that's really what we're looking to prove in this Walter Reed study, if we can prove that we can get it better, even 10 or 15% better, that amounts to trillions of dollars over time in Medicare.
Yeah, and because what's always discussed, whether it's Medicare or Medicaid, what's always discussed when they talk about the solvency of it and whether over the course of time Medicare, Medicaid, or any other government health program is going to be solvent, the issue is always this. It's not the cost today. It's that the costs are going up faster than the money that's coming in. And ultimately the costs are going to outrun what the government can pay. So it's eventually not going to be able to afford it because it's getting more and more expensive. And this sounds like something that may be able to work towards, to some extent, lowering cost and lowering waste on stuff that doesn't work.
We're going to have to figure out a way to apply your technology to cost inflation as well.
We're spending more on these meds than Black Hawk helicopters in the military. And, it's really just been in the last 20 years. I think they've grown 400% in the last 20 years. So This is a relatively new thing that I think has kind of crept up on everybody. We've gotten to the point now where we realize paying for more failure doesn't work.
This is really great stuff. We certainly appreciate you coming. And CNS Response, if somebody wants some information about what you're doing, they want to find out about it, they want further information, you have a website, they have information.
Sure do.
What do they need to do?
It's www.cnsresponse.com.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have a phone number. It's 888-545-2677.
Okay. And is there an email address?
It's peerinfo at cnsresponse.com.
Great, because there may be someone out there listening right now who works in some industry or who's had a light bulb go over their head. I know I certainly have, and normally I'm not one to go around and promote any company or anything else, but when I see something that I think is of value to our society, I think it's my responsibility to put it out there, to put the information out there. And I think this is kind of, I really feel like here on News Views that we've kind of scooped a pretty big story here. And, 6 months from now, a year from now, we'll be seeing big changes in the medical industry worldwide because of this new technology. I wouldn't call it technology. What do you refer to it if we don't call it technology? What do you call it? A new process or what?
Yeah, honestly, we just call it math. It's just basically applied math and I was showing the FDA how we do it, and we basically use the Pythagorean theorem to compare these, response curves. And they said, well, we're probably about 2,600 years late on the Pythagorean theorem, but we're glad you use it.
Great. So we're going back to old ancient Greece, right?
Exactly.
And 2,600 years ago. And so I must end our conversation by quoting Socrates, my favorite Socrates quote. I only consider myself wiser than other men because I am conscious of my own ignorance.
Hear, hear.
Okay, great. That's George Carpenter with CNS Response. Thank you. CNS Response, and you want more information, go to cnsresponse.com, and hopefully you're going to be this technology is going to be saving some lives and making some people's lives a whole lot better.
Thanks so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're listening to WPFW 89.3 FM here in Washington, D.C. We are a Pacifica station. My name's Garland Nixon.